we're going to start recording. All right. Great, so welcome everyone to today's session, Melding Together. My name is Meg Bowerstocks, and I'm the Visitor Engagement Supervisor at the Museum of the American Revolution. And I'm joined by my colleague, who I'll pass off to Cassie to introduce herself.
Hello, I'm Cassie Graff. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Manager of Public Programs at the California Academy of Sciences in San Francisco.
Great, awesome. So we wanted to get started off with a poll at first, just kind of see where everybody's at, and Cassie's gonna start that off in just a moment. And the poll question is, did anyone switch roles or departments during the pandemic? And there is yes, no.
I screwed up, but I sent the wrong one.
All right, that's okay.
So well, here goes the real one.
There we go.
Right,
yes, thank you. So did you switch roles during the pandemic? Yes, no, it's complicated. I'm one of those people that kind of falls into it's complicated. All right, so just waiting for everybody to kind of.
Looks like we have 11 so far. So there's 5 of you holding out. You must be thinking real hard about the answer.
There's a couple people that said it's complicated. No, okay, there's quite a, the no's are kind of in the lead at this moment.
I love that we have so many it's complicated.
Yeah.
In fact, I would love to hear in the chat what makes it complicated.
Absolutely, yes, for sure. All right, so it's really a tie between no and it's complicated. Thank you for all who's voting, and some people said yes. I am one of those individuals who also fell into this it's complicated role. A lot of my role didn't really change. I started out, as part of the education department at the Museum of the American Revolution. And then I was furloughed for a time when we first shut down from the museum. And then I ended up coming back to a whole new department, but relatively my role and what I did not change, just my departments. So like I said, I'm from the Museum of the American Revolution. We are in the heart of Old City, Philadelphia. So if you've ever heard of a place called Independence Hall where they signed the Declaration of Independence, or if you've ever heard of the Liberty Bell, we are right down the street from those places. And the Museum of the American Revolution is a brand new museum. It opened roughly 4 years ago. I have my 4-year pin right here. And what we want to do at the museum is uncover and share compelling stories about the diverse people and events that sparked America's ongoing experiment in liberty, equality, and self-government. And we do that through many ways. We tell these diverse stories about Native Americans, who you can see an image of our Oneida Theater at the bottom right corner there. We talk about the idea of what it was like to be on a privateer ship, so you could actually board a privateer ship and hear what life was like at sea from an everyday man like James Fortin, who was a person of African descent, who went to be a privateer during the Revolutionary War. And then we also have probably one of my personal favorite objects, Washington's war tent. And you get to see a sneak peek of that in the upper right-hand corner. And like I said, we've been open for about 4 years, and it's a brand new museum, so a lot of things have changed since we opened to now. But originally, our frontline staff worked in 2 separate departments, one of which originally when we first opened was called guest services. So here you see our beautiful staircase, and behind that staircase is our orientation theater, which our guest services team was responsible for. They also were responsible for doing theater operation of Washington's War Tent Theater. They also did ticketing sales like the front desk, surveys, and also did membership sales as well too. All of those things very important, and really integral in the museum, important in the museum. And then we also had other frontline staff who were museum educators, who were responsible for delivering guided tours both to students and adults, adult add-on talks and programs. So those are specific programs for a specific talk, like maybe Women in the Revolution, for example. They also were responsible for gallery interpretation, which was, working in the galleries, talking to guests. Mike T's on a tour right here. And they also did discovery carts, which allows some hands-on learning for people. And after the museum closed, we had to pivot. I think that's the biggest word that Cassie and I are going to be using throughout this entire presentation. Because of course the museum closed, and like a lot of people in a lot of museums, the frontline staff were some of the first people to go. And I myself was also one of those people. But when we closed down, it allowed the museum to kind of reevaluate what are some things that were missing, what are some things we wanted to enhance this frontline experience, for our frontline staff. And we decided to merge the guest services role and the educational role into a new department, the visitor engagement department. And when we came back, we started with a very small staff. You can see some of their smiling faces right here, as well as Katie Sampson from Artreach, because we did a training with Artreach right before we came back. And we created this visitor engagement department that was going to meld both the educational side, but also the guest services side. Because what we learned is that those two different departments, having that difference in departments between that staff created a hierarchy. It also didn't allow for us to be able to customize the guest experience from the start when they walked in the door all the way through to the Washington's War Tent Theater. It also allowed for them to understand both the sides of the coins of these different aspects of the role of what it was like to be selling tickets, but also working in the galleries. So a little bit more of a common understanding for what the other side was going through. So what you see here, and I really am proud of this frontline staff and this team. They're some of my favorite people who work inside the museum. But for example, on the left-hand side here, you see Andy and Matt, who were former educators who led guided tours, now learning how to sell tickets at the front desk. And then vice versa, you have Sarah, who was an excellent guest services associate, now learning how to interpret a discovery cart. So everybody had to learn each other's roles. I think Sarah had the harder time because Sarah had to learn all about the American Revolution and how we engage guests in those conversations. But it was really exciting to be able to kind of meld these together and to create this new team. And as we were creating this team, we were able to welcome back even some more staff since we have reopened. But we really wanted to be transparent, especially in the beginning. We didn't know, and like most of us didn't know what happened when COVID started, if we were going to shut down again, what things would happen. And we just wanted to be honest and saying that we don't have all the answers, and we're kind of just going through this week by week. We also want to be respectful. Not everybody's going to have the same comfortability as everybody else. And we need to be respectful of what people's comforts and their levels are. Also understanding. We just really have to be understanding to the fact that, again, not everybody's going to see eye to eye on this. In some cases, people are going through quite a challenge having to come back, to this new department. And also to show and model behavior. I, as part of the management staff, we really have to be on the floor alongside our frontline staff. You can't ask a frontline staff or a part-time staff member to do something that you necessarily haven't done yourself, to be able to understand it and live through it. And then talk it out. We always have problems, there will always be problems, but the important time is to be able to make sure you take time with your team and talk about what's going on, whether they're happy, whether they're upset, and trying to working through those different things that they're experiencing. And then before we get into programming, I just want to talk a little bit how we pivoted programming wise. You see on the upper left here, one of our former educators giving a school guided tour, but of course we couldn't give guided tours in the middle of this pandemic. So we actually switched to virtual online learning, where our VEA staff came into the building and worked together to do these virtual tours. And it was really great because we've now been able to access school tours as far as Colorado and even California, which is really awesome, some of which would never have come in the building. And then one of the things that we did learn is that our adult programs were actually more successful online. Terrible picture, but in the upper left-hand corner there, I ran an artisan workshop where we were making pinballs. And these were quite difficult because these are longer sessions that might take 2 to 3 days. And it was much easier to get people involved if they were able to do it online. And then at the bottom side too, we have an adult highlights tour that people could take. And this has been really successful for us. And I think we're gonna keep this even now because we've been able to contact many different libraries and do this adult programming. And I know I've talked a lot now, but what's really great is that this is our team. It's growing even more, and it's just nice to be able to see this team keep on growing. So I think it is time for our second poll now, and I'm going to drop that in the chat. And we were just curious to see if people have closed during the pandemic, if they stayed open, how many times have they closed, once or twice? Our museum closed twice, and specifically.
Yeah, the Academy had 2 closures, one in March, like most people did, that lasted through the whole summer. And then we had a second one that we closed right after Thanksgiving, and that took us all the way through March, right, the next March of this year. So yeah, we are definitely in the two closures category. So I'm seeing so far we have 7 folks who said 1 long closure and 5 folks who said 2 or more closures. Nobody stayed open the whole time.
Probably good for safety.
Yeah, right. Looks like Katie says 1 short closure.
Mm.
All right. I'm gonna end our poll here. Okay, thanks for sharing, folks. Meg, let's go ahead and move on. All right, let's pivot over to me. Again, I'm Cassie. I'm from the California Academy of Sciences. My museum is located in the heart of San Francisco's Golden Gate Park. It includes a planetarium, an aquarium, a rainforest, and a natural history museum, all under one living roof. And our mission is to regenerate the natural world through science, learning, and collaboration. Next slide, please. So this is what public programs, what my team kind of looked like day to day before the shutdown, before COVID. We engaged guests in the Academy's mission through dynamic, interactive, and really unforgettable experiences. For audiences large, so you can see we had like up to 400 people sometimes, the bottom there, and small, we had small groups sometimes too, but they were mostly on site and in person. And then bam, the pandemic hits, and all of a sudden all the rules change, the resources change, and the needs of our audiences change. Next slide, please. So what did we do? Here's a couple of things that we experienced, and I'm curious to see if any of you are nodding along with me. Can we have shared touchables? Nope. Can we draw crowds of people together? Nope. We all have to social distance, right? The museum's closed, so we can only engage online. Volunteer programs are on hiatus until it's safe and we have the bandwidth to bring them back. So I'm happy to say we are bringing back some of our docent volunteers this month. Yay. And we had staff furloughs and layoffs. So I'm sure many of you have also experienced this as well. Hold on just a second. I screwed something up on my screen. Great. Okay. All right, next slide. So what did we do? Did we say, well, we'll just take everything away and let's just bury our heads in the sand until the pandemic ends? Heck no. We pivoted, right, to find quick and scrappy solutions, and we rose to the challenge because we care about our institutions, we care about our guests, and we care about our communities. Next slide. So here are some ways we pivoted, and you may have done something similar. Instead of doing in-person programs, we added online programs like our youngster yoga here. Next slide. Instead of doing shows for really large crowds, we pivoted to interpretation for small groups. Next slide. Instead of indoor gathering spaces and playrooms, we focused on activating outdoor spaces and our nature play area. Next slide. Instead of volunteer and staff-led engagements, we adapted activities to be self-directed. Next slide. So let me focus on 2 stories for you today that shows how we pivoted, and we're going to start out with a success story. Next slide. So let me start by introducing you to our Junior Scientist Adventure Program, sponsored by Oracle. In pre-pandemic times, it consisted of a backpack full of STEM-related tools and a guide. So it was a little packet full of instructions on what you could do. It was free, totally free for any guest to borrow through the day. They just had to come up to our Naturalist Center, which is a little room, and they would show us some piece of collateral, and they could borrow it and then bring it back. But we closed, and after we reopened, we wanted to continue this program in some sort of way that kind of kept its essence. We wanted it to be free. We wanted to offer STEM-based activities for kids that they could do independently with limited touchable objects and less staff oversight, because we didn't have as many staff around and we didn't have that Naturalist Center space open for where they could check out the backpack. So what we did was we took those guides and we took each page from the guide and kind of pulled them apart and turned them into stanchion toppers. Next slide. So from those stanchion toppers, we placed them in 7 different locations throughout the museum. And at each of those locations was a different STEM-based activity that participants could do. Now, to do the activity, it was something they could social distance and they could do without any like kind of hands-on stuff, but there were free notebooks and pencils provided in baskets on the stanchions. And so oftentimes they would use their notebooks and their pencils, their scientist notebooks, to do the activity. One kind of outlier is the station on the bottom right-hand side was a green bin, and then they'd use their magnifier and then deposit it into the dirty bin, which was the orange or kind of red one on the right. May, can you still hear me? I'm wondering if my internet's cutting out.
It did cut out a second. You might want to talk about the magnifying glass. I don't think anybody caught that part.
Oh, okay. Actually, you know what I'll do is I'll just turn off my background filter, because sometimes that slows it down. Okay, so the magnifier is basically, you could borrow a clean one, use it for the activity, drop it into the dirty bin, and then our staff would clean them all at the end of the day. All right, so let's go to our next slide. Fantastic. So this is what you would see. This is what happened, right? You'd walk around the museum and you just saw kids and guests of all ages, which was a surprise, totally engrossed in observation and scientific sketching. We saw an increase of 3,000% in usage of our Junior Scientist Adventure Program. We went from about 1,600 engagements in a 6-month period to over 54,000. So not only were we really like getting people to do these activities and have a great time, I guess that's it. It worked. So go ahead to the next slide, please. And yes, not everyone did the suggested activity. Sometimes they just, drew in their notebooks, but they were spending more time engaging with the exhibits, engaging with the animals and the habitats. And yes, it did involve a decent budget to be able to provide those free notebooks and pencils, but the way we were able to support that was by redirecting funds that we would have otherwise used for other programs that were on hiatus or canceled altogether. Next slide. So that was our success story. Now let me tell you about one that's less than success story, an good enough story. Next slide. So when we were closed, one of my jobs was to think about, what are we going to do? What are we going to offer to people so that they can social distance? There's not enough, not interaction with staff, yada, yada. And we were inspired by all this beautiful artwork that was being done in our communities, and we were seeing online using chalk. And so like you might have seen images like this on, all the internet places of beautiful murals and these collaborative art pieces. And then we thought, hey, this could be a fun and safe way to engage people at the museum. Next slide. So here's what we did. We created a clean chalk bucket and a dirty chalk bucket. So a kid could come up and grab 1 or 2 pieces of chalk. And we created this stenciled kind of mural-ish type area on the ground, thinking kids would, take a piece of chalk, color it in their own way. But of course, best laid plans. Next slide. this is what happened. The kids did not color inside of the lines, duh. Instead, it was much more of a free form art experience, which meant that the entire patio got covered in chalk art, like it was one big, beautiful canvas. So we quickly abandoned the whole like stencil idea. So next slide, we tried to kind of corral it, you know, to a chalk drawing zone. And despite trying to corral it into that zone, again, kids don't color inside lines. So what we saw happen was that they would draw on benches, on the building, next slide. And they would combine it with water to create chalk paint. And yes, it was all very beautiful. It was very creative, but it turned into a real chore for staff to have to scrub and hose down the chalk every day. And sometimes the clean and dirty bin system was completely ignored altogether, and kids would just dump out the whole bin of chalk and just, you know, free form like that. So we only offered that for a few months, and eventually it was discontinued and replaced by other offerings. So next slide. What did we learn during this period? We learned a couple things. First of all, on our team, some folks handled change better than others, especially because we had a system that was very well established and predictable ahead of time. And I think this is true of most of us, is that, you know, change is hard. So to get everyone into the mindset of rapid design iteration, we had to like set that expectation ahead of time from the get-go, that they should expect a period of rapid change, that it was really crucial to be flexible. The next thing we learned is that just because you're trying new things out and changing things often, that doesn't mean that you can skimp on the communication. You have to have a plan and communicate the details of that plan to everyone on the team. The more transparency, the better. And it created more empowered employees that could make you know, informed decisions on the spot, on the fly when they needed to. Some of these learnings I noticed, Meg, are very similar to yours. Our third point is over communicate. Make sure other departments are aware of the changes you're going to make, keep them updated on the progress periodically, and make it known that you're welcome to feedback, because we're all in it together, even if they're, you know, in some totally different department. Learning point number 4 was utilize existing assets. Who has the time to reinvent the wheel? No one. So we had to take what we had and recycle it into something new that fits the need. And lastly, we didn't have the luxury of prototyping our activities because the museum was closed. There was nobody to prototype it on. So what we learned was how crucial it is to do that step when you're able to. So it reiterated the importance of formative assessment and prototyping. All right, that's that. So let's go to the next slide. Thank you. And before we move on to our group activity here, don't worry, folks, you're not going to have to talk. I was wondering if anyone has any questions. Next slide, Meg. So if you have a question, either drop it in the chat, or you can come off mute.
Sorry, I did that thing with where I was trying to unmute myself and then I hit exit and exited out of the PowerPoint. We've all been through this. We've done millions of these PowerPoints before.
It's true. You'd think we'd be better at it by now, but I know I'm not.
You would think we'd be masters of the craft, but here we are.
It's true. Okay, well, I'm not seeing any questions yet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move us on, but then if we start to get some in the chat, we can always circle back.
Sure.
All right, so next slide. Can you go down to the Padlet for us?
So if you want to, you could scan this QR code because everybody is very fond of these QR codes and go to the Padlet. If not, what we're going to do is we're going to share the Padlet with you all. So just give me one moment while I grab that so I can post it in the chat. All right.
All right. So while we're waiting for Meg to put the link to the Padlet in the chat, for those of you who have not used Padlet before, let me give you a little tour. So on the left-hand side, that column will give you the instructions in case you need to refer to them. So basically what you're going to do is for each of the questions in the right two columns, you can respond by clicking the little plus sign at the bottom. So for example, we would like to hear from you. How did you pivot? So you'll click the plus sign, and then you can write in the text field down there. Yay! Thank you, Meg.
You're welcome.
And then you can hit publish or whatever. And then once you have contributed, you can read what others have written. Now I know it's going to take some time for us all to participate. So go ahead, and I'm going to give you, let's say maybe
7 minutes.
Yeah, well, actually, let's do 5, and then we can regroup and see.
Sure.
Okay, I'm going to set a timer for 5 minutes, and you can go off camera if you like to contribute.
And I'll stop sharing my screen so you all don't have to see what each other is saying at the moment. I was thinking though, Cassie, during your presentation, I'm sure someone else was thinking about their operations person at their institution seeing the chalkboard on the building and being like, ah, and freaking out about that.
Yeah, I thought that a few people might have that reaction. We did the first time we found just chalk everywhere, but you know, it washes off. And of course, if anyone has questions about how to use Padlet, you can ask us in whatever form is comfortable for you.
Also just going to take a minute and read some of the comments that were in the chat from earlier about roles changing. So it does seem like a couple people took on more work from what they originally had and added some other things like project management and marketing from their previous backgrounds to their job. And some people had adjacent roles with a new angle or a new spin on it. A lot of people with the It's Complicated kind of explained what they were feeling, which is good to see.
Yeah, not surprising. More work.
Yeah, I think one of the toughest things, you know, that we experienced in our museum is that, you know, you can, so much staff, we had a lot of staff at the beginning, you know, before we closed, and then, you know, we really had to reevaluate how we were doing things. Like we used to serve, you know, almost like 600 school kids a day, like, you know, just keep cranking the well-oiled machine of bringing kids in. And now we can't do that. So we had to have a lot of conversations about, well, how many kids can actually be in this building versus like, you know, how many people do we actually have as a staff to retain to facilitate these groups? And we're still trying to figure that out even today. I mean, we had about 189 school kids come in this morning, and you know, that's the first large day we've had since we reopened, which is pretty crazy. But it's interesting that we're still trying to figure this out as we're all going through it.
Absolutely. I'm going to give the remaining 3 minutes as quiet time because I know some people need that time to process and contribute, and then we'll come back and give you the next set of directions. And if you are done contributing, go through and read what others have written, and you can even comment on what they wrote, if you would like to. All right, as we come back, one thing I'll share, Meg, even though my section wasn't really on how staff melded together, but we did recently cross-train our public programs team and our planetarium programs team. So now some of our public program staff are trained to do our planetarium shows, and some of their planetarium staff are trained to work in one of our engagement spaces. And that is something we've never done before, just because each role is so content heavy. It's kind of hard to hold all that in your head at the same time. But so far, it's been like a really great opportunity for both teams to try something new and, like, you know, be more involved, kind of like integrating our cultures together. But what I did find interesting is one of the contributions in here, if I can find it again, was someone said how when they tried to integrate their education teams and frontline staff, that it didn't go well. Did you see that comment as well?
I did not.
It says, we combine teams also, educators and customer service associates. It didn't go well, and eventually our entire education team left. It did answer the question we always had of whether to combine them to one department or not. And I'm curious what your thoughts are, since you said that you saw success when you did that.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I think it all depends on, yeah, you know, I honestly wasn't sure if it was going to work. We have some, you know, we've brought back many individuals who never have worked a cash register in their entire lives, and I didn't know if it was going to be what they wanted. But we really met people on their level, which was really helpful, especially the people who wanted, you know, to come back, but only for a limited time. So it was able to work with people. But yeah, it's kind of fascinating to think about that. But, you know, it all depends on how you've set up your group dynamic. I will say our staff is a lot happier because we, like I said, we're a constant machine almost. And our staff is a lot happier now because they're able to take breaks. There's a little bit more levity. So I think because we're such a new institution, we were able to really be able to kind of make this choice happen and kind of meld it a little bit easier because we were so brand new.
Yeah, very interesting. I also noticed in the chat, Katie says it's interesting that there are a lot fewer which of your changes will live on than pivots. I also think that's interesting, but it kind of makes me reflect on the fact that, you know, there are no failures, just learning opportunities, right? Yep. So I think
Absolutely.
we all had a lot of learning opportunities this past 20 months.
Yeah. I also wanted to say, because I thought about this too after, of course, I said all of my things. There was something about What Change Will Live On. It says audio tours through QR codes. That is also something that's staying with us. We had handheld devices, but the QR code has really been helpful. A lot of people are able to quickly access that and just have it from their smartphones. We do have the handheld devices, but the QR codes are also staying in our world too, which is really great to see.
Yeah, absolutely. We did a QR code reservation system for our planetarium with, mixed success. But I'm noticing that a lot of the changes that are living on have to do with time ticketing and reservations and things like that. And I know we did the same thing at our museum too. We definitely had time ticketing. And one of the things that we've changed recently is instead of going from like hourly or like hour and a half blocks, we've gone to just 3 blocks throughout the day. Because we just, we've noticed that we don't need that level of, segmentation throughout the day as we did earlier.
Yeah, I'd also be curious, I think, now that I'm seeing this, like, what are some of the challenges I think that we are still, I think I'm going to make another section real quick. Can I do that impromptuly? I'd like to also know, like, any of the challenges that people have been facing through this, like with their programming or with, how you're pivoting, but is that working? So I'm just going to write challenges as a topic. If anybody wants to present any of their challenges, go for it.
Oh, so many, Meg.
I know. Where do you even begin, right?
Great. Well, people are typing their challenges if they're going to. We have 5 more minutes. I'll also read in the chat. Shar, I'm not sure, says, and educators were also able to access those audio tours from the classroom for other uses.
Oh,
yes.
Interesting.
One of the things I did not talk about, which I've done a whole other talk on, is we started doing on our website, I'll drop a link in the chat in a minute, we added a section called Science at Home, and it's completely, it's like bundles of activities that kids can do at home with or without a caregiver present. So there's crafts, coloring sheets, videos, science projects. And what's cool is that we intended it for that audience, like kids at home while mom's on Zoom or whatever. But what ended up happening is so many folks, all these audiences we didn't anticipate are using that material. So we've got libraries and after school program leaders and pod groups and all things like this. So it's great that we created these resources and they're able to be used in different ways. I'll also just point out, someone said that they did a map QR code that will most likely live on. I think QR codes in general, I kind of knew what they were pre-pandemic, but wow, it's like
they really they went out of fashion and then they came right back into fashion as soon as the pandemic hit, which is interesting. I also I remember when I was an intern at a museum and doing web things was something that you learned how to do, distance learning, and then it kind of fell through. And then here we are again in 2020, 2021 doing those, reaching those virtual programs again. Yeah, QR codes had a glow up. Absolutely. Yes, Erin, that is correct. They definitely had a glow up.
Well, it looks like no one had any challenges this past 20 months, Meg. That's great.
Wait, we did get one. Definitely where to begin. Assessing what worked and what didn't. It says some things had very obvious data points that gave us answer, but there are definitely many things that staff are divided on as far as success, particularly when there isn't any clear quantitative data. And I think that points to realigning around our mission and reorienting ourselves to that. Ooh, this is an interesting one. We allow our teams to provide their personal feelings about how we should open to a larger audience. It is awesome to get everyone's input on what they're comfortable with, but when interacting with the public, but 1 or 2 people can now prevent us from moving forward out of this pandemic mode. Yeah, that's something I think that's definitely, Interesting. I mean, we're at our museum, we're a pretty small staff. I mean, we're about 20 people as of now, but for specifically with like our attendance, we have an allotted amount. We serve like 200 tickets every time slot now that we're kind of out of this like heat of the pandemic, if you will. But our guided tours, we came to this understanding that, especially with our highlights tours, which are for general admission and for our, adult guests primarily, that it was easier. We used to navigate people, like 20 people at a time, trying to shove them through a very packed gallery on a busy Saturday. And we learned that that was not the best for the guest experience, nor that was that good for the person who was giving the tour. And it was really nice to be able to come to like a collective decision that while we are comfortable doing, 15-person tours, some of these tours, we could prefer to keep them, when they're at 11 and 3 p.m. at like the prime time of our museum visitation, to keep them to a handful of about 5 people. And that's been working for us so far, but then we do other bookings where they have increased numbers.
Yeah. And for us, I know we only have 1 minute left, so I'll just conclude with this thought. For us, how we move forward with, staff with different comfort levels is we're lucky in that we actually have an epidemiologist that works at the Academy. She's an expert in virology. And so she's been kind of guiding us in the science, of this virus since the get-go, and like what are the rules, what is safe, what are we allowed to do? And so we use her as our guiding light. And then for folks that still feel nervous about, one change or another, we ask them, what would it take to make them feel comfortable while still being able to perform their job? So we task them for finding a solution. And that we've found success on our team. I know that, may not work for everybody, but that's how we've approached it over here. All right, any last thoughts? It's 1:30.
Oh, that's right. You're all the way in California. It's 4:30 where I am.
Oh, 4:30. It's time to go. It's time to conclude. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Meg.
We still actually have a few minutes, actually.
Do we really?
Yeah, we have about like 10 minutes still.
Yeah, you have about 15. Yeah, your session goes to 4:45. You can still talk to each other, and I'm interested too to hear different things. So keep on going, guys. You're good.
Great. I love not being cut off.
I would say theater capacity. I saw this one for challenges. That was a huge challenge for us to, not in capacity, but also with performances. So we do a lot of live performances where people come and they do first-person interpretation, and they meet historical figures from the past. And originally we were set actually in a place where I am right now, which is our small, like 18th century environment, where, you could pack about like 30 people in the pews or 100 people in our Washington's War 10 theater. And during COVID, when we first did these theater operations, we, had families, a family would sit next to each other, and then we leave 6 feet apart. And that was really tricky because you also need to make sure that they're masked, which is another big challenge and a big hurdle. And even now we still don't pack those theaters tightly because, just out of respect that not every guest is going to feel comfortable. It was interesting to see our staff pivot with the guests about once they lifted restrictions, being like, well, sit wherever you feel comfortable. And then they would kind of gauge it and be like, okay, it's about 60% full. I'm not going to fill this theater. I'm just going to run the show. And for our performances, it was challenging even for our performers because, they're used to projecting their voice, much like I am doing right now, and not wearing a mask. So they had to come through that whole difficulty of like, how do I still invoke this, this character while behind a mask, but also being respectful. I mean, we have images of our interpreter, standing outside of our staircase, and then every family is on a square that's 6 feet apart. So that was definitely a big challenge for us too, and theater wise.
Yeah, you know, on some days, like weekends, we will still have like, you know, larger crowds, like in some of our more iconic exhibits, like in front of our African penguin habitat. And, you know, at the beginning, it was like, all right, everyone's gotta be 6 feet apart. And so our team, you know, part of our job was to like help guide people to follow those rules, and help them 6 feet, you know, distance. But now that, you know, we've changed tack and we're, you know, we're like, oh, you know, social distancing is less important than masking. You know, we kind of leave it up to our guests to decide what is comfortable for them and to self-select. So we have been able to bring back some of those more like show style programs. You know, we were just doing engagement, just having conversations with guests one-on-one or with their family group or whatever. But now we're able to, like, we brought back a puppet show, and that'll draw maybe 25 people. And it's like, okay, well, if you don't want to be in a crowd with 20 other people, then you can choose not to be there. And we're bringing back our penguin feeding program in the next coming months, hopefully. All goes according to plan. And like, that was that big picture, right? The super crowd. And, you know, we are on microphone, so we have the ability to like encourage, you know, hey folks, you know, give everyone a safe space or whatever. But yeah, back to that, people can self-select. I mean, this is not new anymore. People can choose what they feel comfortable with.
Absolutely. Yeah, we actually are going to be hosting our first, we do, you know, a weekend where we have living, you know, historians come and reenact the British come back and occupy our city. Very fun time of the year, but you know, we couldn't do that last year, and this is the first time we're doing it. And it's like, you know, every participant when they enter in the building has to wear a mask, but if they're outside, it's kind of up to their own discretion, and the same thing with our guests. I do see a lot of comments about like ticketing systems and time ticketing and people finding that successful. I was wondering if anybody wanted to unmute themselves and kind of share why they're happy to keep that going and why that's living on. What's helpful about that?
Hi, this is Miriam. I work at Lowell Observatory in Flagstaff, Arizona. And before the pandemic, we really only had general admission. So we didn't really need any timed entry. We had a few like special events here and there that we managed with an outside system, but we had already decided to switch to a new system. So we were actually really surprised how helpful it was, not only to do the timed entry. We had, you know, specific timed tours with a limited amount of people. So it was great to be able to cap the amount of people with the system. And also we were able to insert a form with the new ticketing system that allowed us to have people agree to whatever our COVID policies were before they showed up. So if like somebody didn't want to wear a mask, we're like, you already agreed to that. So it really helped us out a lot. And now that we've been using it, we're actually thinking of, you know, ways we might change our programming even when we go back to general admission.
Yeah, absolutely. I also see another comment from Emily, which says timed entry allowed us to gauge how busy we were roughly from day to day. And like, yeah, that I find is like super helpful. I feel like I look at our Outlook, you know, the night before, the day of, and I'm like, okay, how busy are we gonna be? And see what that's like. Absolutely. Anybody else have any thoughts about time ticketing? Yes, it is awesome for capturing data and following up for surveys. Yes, absolutely. And everybody in the museum world loves a good survey, for sure. I see a couple nodding heads. Yes, everybody loves a survey. Awesome. Let's see, what else?
Yeah, I'm looking around at our challenges over here. You know, one thing, nobody's mentioned this yet, so I don't know if it's just an us thing, but one recent pivot we had to do in the last couple months is we instituted a vaccination requirement. So every single person, staff, guests, volunteers, anyone is required to show proof of vaccination or a recent negative COVID test when they enter the museum. And because the other teams that would normally be doing this, like guest experience staff or security teams, were short-staffed, public programs was asked to do this. So we started doing this in, I think, September. So just, last month with very little notice. And so it was like a huge pivot for us that we started doing even after me and Meg started planning the session, where it's been a little rocky, right?
Yeah.
Like there are many people that, have a hard time with it. It adds complication to the whole entry system. So that's been a challenge for us. But to be honest, we have gotten way more people thank us for requiring vaccinations and negative COVID tests than we have had any issues.
Wow.
Yeah.
It seems like Miriam, I think also is going there. Looks like they're launching a vaccine requirement or testing in November too. I know we have, we have masks regardless of vaccination status, but all of our staff are asked to be vaccinated and any new hires must be vaccinated. But we are starting to get in this world where with certain programming about requiring the vaccine before they go to this program, which is interesting. And we'll see how that goes. But it's, yeah, I think, do you have any, looks like they're working on messaging and FAQs about that.
Yeah, email me, Miriam, we'll chat. Our communications team came up with a lot of very nice language, and we've got, thoughts on like where to position the staff in the line and all that kind of stuff. So I can get very granular with advice, but we can do that offline.
Yeah, I definitely really would love to chat with you, Emily.
Great.
Okay, we might have, we have about 5 minutes left, so I think we may have time for like one more question, maybe.
Sure.
All right, what do you see, Meg? Or does anyone else have a question?
Anybody have a question?
We covered it. We solved it all, Meg. Oh, wait.
Just ask for maybe if you want to drop your email in there, and I'll also do the same, even though nobody has a question for me, but that's fine.
Oh, they might.
They might. There's my email.
And there's mine.
Perfect.
All right. Well, I really appreciate the discussion we all had today. In Padlet form. I found this really interesting to hear from all of you and what your institutions have been doing.
And I think if you save this Padlet, it will also live on, if it were.
It's true. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you all so much for attending this afternoon's presentation. I will happily give you back the next 4 minutes of your afternoon to take an extra little bit of time to yourself before the next session. But I think they might be dropping some of those sessions in the chat as well too.
Yeah, here's the first one. And then, so next sessions, one will be a pre-recorded one. The other one will be Mark from Grounds for Sculpture, talking about how to use board games to engage your staff. And he has a whole setup up there in his office, which is pretty awesome. So just saying, shameless plug for Mark's session.
Cool.
All right, well, have a good rest of your day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.